Already some people are joining us at this time of day. Before we begin and I'll introduce everyone, I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people as the custodians of the land on which we live, learn, and work. And we pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We especially take this time to recognize and honor Indigenous women who are here, as well as those who have gone before us. We look to their collective wisdom in guiding us, guiding our work, and seek continued partnership as we work together to improve health outcomes for all women living in this land. So again, welcome everyone. And thank you again for joining us today. My name is Netta. I am a member of the Women's Health Research, Translation, and Impact Network, Workforce Development Program Working Group. I'll be the host of today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Social Connectedness Matters, Health, Wellbeing, and Thriving in Research Careers. We'll be exploring the role of social connectedness in health and well-being, discussing loneliness as an important public health issue, and reflecting on how connection, collaboration, and mentorship and supportive research communities can help us build meaningful and successful research careers. Questions and comments are very welcome, especially since this is a webinar and you won't have the option to actually raise your voice and participate in person. But we, again, please feel free to post them in the Q&A section. I'll do my best to bring them into the discussion during the session. And also there will be some time at the end to present your questions. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Melody Ding. Melody is an internationally recognized researcher in the physical activity, social connectedness, and chronic disease prevention. She leads the Australian Systems Approaches to Physical Activity, ASAPA Plus, and the Systems Hub at the Prevention Research Collaboration at the University of Sydney. Melody, thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait to start our conversation.
Great. So just to open up before we delve into the, really juicy stuff of loneliness and social isolation, I just wanted to just tell us about your research journey, just in general.
How far do I go back?
How far do you want to go back? I think since our audience is made up largely of women in health research, especially early career research, you could maybe tell us a little bit about your journey into public health, like what first inspired you to pursue this field?
I really wish I had one of these TED Talk like story, about this is the moment. I always wanted to do this when I was a kid, and then I'm so, motivated to achieve my dream. But my career is nothing like that. It was for those who are, not familiar with me, I grew up in China studying marine biology, completely different. At that time, I thought that's the life I wanted. And then when I was in university, I just felt like that's not really the life I wanted. I wanted to go overseas. I want to explore the world. I want to expand my horizon, and I'm willing to study whatever offers me opportunity. So it's purely a coincidence that I came across public health and but when I read about it, I was like, okay, I think it's interesting enough. I don't know what that is about, but sounds interesting. So I just, I was 21 years old and very brave, and I just put in some application and see how it goes. And I got an offer, I got scholarship, and I went to the US. I went to San Diego to study public health, but I do have to say that from the first lecture onward, I really fell in love with this discipline, and I felt like that was somehow kind of a hidden mission that I didn't know that I mean a lot to me. So yeah, and then I continue, and I thought I wanted to do a PhD, and then I didn't really plan to come to Australia, but again, very accidental. I guess the story of my life is that, always be prepared, but always be willing to be surprised, that you just have to keep an open mind to that.
And so your research has you started out as a physical activity expert, but that has been evolved since then to also including social well-being and social connectedness. So how did that happen?
Well, actually, before physical activity, I worked in tobacco control for some time as well. Everything was accidental, It was as a grad student, you worked on whatever that at that time pay me some very minimum wage salary to do. So I kind of had the opportunity to be exposed to a field, and again, I just fell in love with it. And in the physical activity field, I think it's something I really relate to because if anything, I've always been someone who loves sports, love moving. So I think that kind of combines my passions and who I am, my identity. But moving to loneliness, and social connection is really, Aneta, you're part of that journey as well, actually.
Yeah.
Who don't know, Netta was one of my former PhD students. It was about 5, 6 years ago. Just right before COVID, one potential PhD student approached me and asked me if I were willing to supervise his PhD on loneliness. At that time, because I really, I love podcasts. I love, reading books, psychology, behavior. So it's just always something I was really fascinated about. And I've, basically already listened to every podcast I can find on loneliness. I read books and then someone approached me. It's like, can I do a PhD on that? And I was like, I'm not an expert. So far, all my experience has been very, pop science, not really my own research area. But, so I didn't give an answer to him straight away. But instead, I went back and I, start reading scientific literature, give me a couple of days and just kind of asking my heart whether that's something I wanted to do. Because every time when you branch out to a new area, it's a lot more challenging. If I continue on with my previous well-defined area where I had international recognition, it's much easier to write a paper. You know where the gaps are, you know which papers to cite. It's just a well-charted route. But for me, like I really kind of wanted to ask my heart if that was something that I was interested in. And then, I think that really kind of brought me back to the moments that I went through transitions in my life. As I shared, I moved countries a couple of times, and at the very beginning, it was very challenging. And especially, moving across very dramatically different cultures, that feeling of kind of self-consciousness in social settings, constantly feeling like there's a spotlight shining above my head, and um, you kind of over conversation, and after a conversation you go back home and you overanalyze, like, did I say something stupid? Why was that person not nodding? I've lived through all that. It was very exhausting, and then when I start to understand that these are actually symptoms of loneliness, I told myself that I want to understand myself better. I want to understand the old Melody, in her early 20s, moving countries, and and I want to understand so that I can help more people going through this journey. So yeah, and then I decided to go on this journey with him together. So we learn from each other. Looking back, I think it was actually a good thing that I kind of worked in a different area before that, because by then, um, social connection was still a new area, particularly in public health. A lot of the previous evidence comes from, education, psychology, and other fields, and there's less of a systematic exploration as what we have done for more established field like physical activity. So I think that coming in from another field actually gives me the tools and perspectives and the bigger picture views of the field of social connection. Um, the only things, you have to catch up on the content area, but that's the easier part. So, and then, then I had you, Netta, and then we again went on a journey together, and you wrote an excellent PhD. And ever since then, it was, kind of one of my main research area. ever since.
That's an amazing story, very inspiring story, and may I say, so brave to hear that, because I think also very inspiring to other EMCR people to hear that, because I think often we sort of established ourselves in one research area and we don't bother to explore, oh, maybe there's another research area that I can explore. And it's really brave that you became an expert in one field, and now for a second time you're already becoming an expert in another field. So that's incredible. So yeah, so I mean, you started talking about loneliness, but just for people who don't actually know, when we say sort of like I use social connectedness as an overall term, like what are we actually talking about?
In terms of loneliness.
Yes.
Before I respond to that specific question, I just want to thank you for that comment, and I just kind of, want to go back to I guess the one of the main things you have heard already from the earlier conversation. Be open-minded and be curious, because I think sometimes especially when we become a bit more established, towards mid-career time, it's very easy to be attached to our ego. And, moving to a new field is a very humbling experience. When you submit a paper, all of a sudden you don't actually know, oh my gosh, I don't know the people in this field well enough. I actually have no idea who will be a better reviewer, and then, when you go to a conference, nobody knows you. So, it is a humbling experience, but I think, and again, like there's the concept that is quite popular at the moment, that is like a beginner mindset. And I think basically just not losing that is really important. And, at the end of the day, we're not our role, we're not who people think we are. As an established researcher, it's really important that we also follow our heart as well, and do what we, are interested in doing. So now I'm
Amazing. I'm
going back to
inspired.
your now I'm going back to the question you just asked. So loneliness has been defined in various different ways. So I think two kind of common definitions of loneliness is that, one is from more evolutionary perspective. That is a prompt for us to reach out for human connection, because we're evolutionally evolved to feel thirst when we're thirsty and need to drink water, and to feel hunger when we're need food. So we also have these inbuilt mechanisms for us to have that thirsty, hungry sort of feeling. We all know how that feels like. We're human beings, so that we reach out for human connections. And the reason is because as the human species have evolved to be a social species, it's much better for us to survive as a group together. And at least, even though sometimes temporarily we have to be on our own, all together, we're evolved to be social. So that's why we have this inbuilt mechanism to remind us that, hey, maybe it's time for you to reach out to people and to be connected again. So that's more from an evolutionary perspective. And from more neuroscience kind of definition, it is the perceived gap between how we feel in terms of our social relationships, and what the and the desired social relationships. So that one, the definition I really like this, the second definition, because it pretty much just defines its inherent nature of being subjective. And because we all have our different, goalposts in terms of what do we see as the ideal social relationships, right? Because for some people, they might want to have, hundreds of friends, all closely connected all the time, and then become it's quite hard to meet that goal. Others might just need one confidant, throughout their life, and as long as that person is around, that they feel satisfied. So that's why, we start to see people who are, very social, have many friends, but still feel lonely. And on the other hand, we have people who have their relatively small social circles, do not go out to socialize very much, but actually don't feel lonely. So I think that's really important, that by definition, we tease out, aloneness and loneliness.
Yeah, that's so it's not just about the number of the relationships that we have, it's also about the quality of the relationships.
Exactly. Exactly.
And we also hear about, I think loneliness is sort of like a buzzword, like you hear it all the time, but there's also a lot of other terms like social isolation, social engagement. So like they sometimes used interchangeably. So I was just wondering, is there a difference? Are they related, all these terms?
Yeah, social isolation is a more objective kind of way of measuring our social connectedness. So that's usually defined by how socially engaged you are, how big your social networks are, and it's kind of easier to measure in a way because you can measure how social engagement, social network, for example, social participation. But loneliness, again, it's a subjective term. So these two are definitely interlinked. If you're at risk for one, you're more at risk for the other one, but they're distinct concepts. Again, like one can be socially isolated and lonely, or vice versa.
Yeah. And so you mentioned risk. So who actually is at risk for loneliness, social isolation?
Yeah, so there's quite a broad range of risk factors being explained, being explored, but as many of the audience who do population research probably relate to that, we tend to overexplore the risk factors that are easy to measure and underexplore those who are not. So, there has been, literature is probably the most well studied will be life stages or age, and what we tend to find is that especially the young adolescent stage tend to be a stage that is quite at risk of loneliness, and partly because that is the stage where our brain is evolving, that we have possibly heightened social needs. We really want to fit in. We're trying to find our tribes in this world, beyond
Mhm.
our parents and families. And that's a really, for all of us, who have experienced that, it's not an easy time. And there's definitely a heightened self-awareness and needs for social validation. So yes, the younger age. And some studies also consider the older population to be more at risk as well. But I think we need to be quite careful with that because it's not necessarily so we really need to think about the risk factor in a more intersectional way rather than a singular way, because if we just overall look at age groups, it is actually the evidence is quite mixed. There's definitely been studies showing that the middle age is more at risk than the older age, but the other studies showing vice versa. But I think, when you start to load on multiple risk factors, for example, if you're older age and living by yourself, not by choice, and then of lower socioeconomic status, having health issues. And that's when we start to really start to see the picture, paint the picture of who is more likely to be at risk. And then there's also, minority status that has been studied, and these can refer to race, ethnic minorities. It can be related to migration status, and sexual minorities as well. So these, again, I think it's as I mentioned earlier, we measure what is easier to measure. It's easier to measure these status as a tick box thing on the survey of your socio-demographic characteristics. But underlying that, people who have some form of minority status would definitely do a lot better in a society that is more tolerant and accepting, and really celebrates diversity. So again, we're looking at multiple layers of complex interplay across a broad range of risk factors.
And so you've mentioned there are some risk factors are more researched than others. So I'm guessing you're referring to this more like the individual level risk factors. So what are some sort of like social and environmental risk factors?
Yeah, very it makes intuitive sense, but the data are quite thin. But with other related concepts like social isolation, it's conceptually stronger, more strongly linked to the social and environmental variables. How we build a city, how we, whether we have third place for people to connect, whether we have public transport system that everybody have the rights to travel, to move around. So all of these, that facilitates opportunities for people to interact with each other in a friendly way, um, are really important. And sometimes, like what I mentioned, it's frustrating that this is the area that there should be more research evidence, but not as much research evidence. Um, but I think myself did, do have this lived experience of that because when I was living in San Diego, it's Southern California, very car dependent, and the the life it was basically just like garage to garage. You leave the house in the morning, you get into the car, and you don't talk to the neighbors much, and then you drive to the office. You park the car in a car park, and then you take the lift the whole time, and you go into your individual office. Everybody has their lunch in front of their computer, so you can literally go through a whole day without a proper basic interaction with someone. So then people have to really make intentional effort to, go, yeah, join this club, do these things, and they become, on top of the mental load of everything else you have to go through just for surviving. But after I moved to Sydney, it was quite a different experience because uh, I didn't have a car for many years. I still just ride my bike to work or, take public transport. And you have opportunities for friendly interactions with people. And when I'm in the office, the culture is a lot more open. Colleagues have lunch with each other. Sometimes it's not necessarily always deep conversation, but just feeling that you're connected. That to me makes a huge difference. And these are, everything I mentioned so far is environmental level.
Yeah, yeah. And so I've asked you about the risk factors. So now I want to go to the other side. What potential outcomes does loneliness have?
Yeah, it's bad. It's one of the risk factors that is just, to me equally important as what we always talk about traditional risk factors like physical inactivity, poor diet, obesity. I think that in terms of the effect sizes we've been observing, it is quite comparable. So I think it's very important that we don't ignore the social health aspects of our life because the WHO defines health as not the absence of disease, but the health and well-being of the social, mental, physical, mental, and social aspects of our life. So the social health has always been, considering that, as a stool with three legs that we can sit on and be stable, right? So that's always kind of a missing leg in a way because a lot of our conversation, most of our conversation is about our physical health, and then there's some of that is about mental health, but the social health is really left behind, even though they're deeply connected. So the typical health outcomes that we have been observing with other risk factors, with elevated risk of all called premature mortality and cardiovascular disease and cognitive function is a big one, like a cognitive decline, dementia, anxieties, and and this is just about the general population, but also in the specialized population, we also see that patients with existing chronic illness who are also, experience prolonged loneliness tend to also have worse disease management outcomes. So I think it's really important that we see this aspect as, important throughout the population, not only those who are healthy, but also those with chronic conditions. So if we can fix this aspect of our life, we can potentially help everybody.
Yeah, for sure. But how do you actually know if a person has an illness? How do you know if the illness, if the loneliness caused the illness, or maybe the illness caused the loneliness?
That is definitely a major weakness of current research because what we often see is that, I don't know how methodological the audience wants to get into here, but this is like a classic confounding bias that we see in epidemiological research because, people tend to feel prolonged loneliness, oftentimes have coexisting mental health or physical health issue. And sometimes feeling lonely is an indicator of the severity of their health conditions. So it's really important that we separate that. What we're currently seeing is that, when loneliness become trendy, there are so many researchers that they just jump straight into loneliness without actually understand the full context and the methodological nuances of this research field. So in the last few years, I really observed so much mass-produced evidence on loneliness and social isolation that are not super useful because they didn't tease out these factors very intentionally. So Netta, without embarrassing you, like with your research, the group, the research that is ongoing in our group, we are really kind of looking into um, using novel statistical methods to try to understand the causal effects of loneliness and social isolation. So, so far the evidence tend to suggest in a causal relationship, at least with mortality outcome. And I think that makes sense, but there's so much that is still remain for us to explore and understand at a deeper level, understand the mechanism. Why is it that, once you feel prolonged loneliness, persistently, that it harms your health through which mechanism? There's a lot of hypotheses, but it's really hard to test them out actually, with real world data.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned some really severe outcomes for loneliness. What kind of interventions are available to improve loneliness and social isolation?
Yeah, if you are, I think you're not going to be surprised. Again, most of the interventions that for which we have good evidence tend to be at the individual level. Again, that's easier to measure, easier to intervene. So, there's definitely relatively solid evidence on, cognitive behavior therapy, for example, try to correct people's view, because in a way that it's like when people feel prolonged loneliness, like the experience that I mentioned with myself, when I first moved to the States, that heightened self uh, like heightened unhealthy level of self-awareness in a way, and overcritical, being overly critical about my social life and that sort of thing. So that could be sometimes actually creates a vicious cycle because then you're less likely to go out because you're worried about being rejected, and then you tend to see rejections in people's relatively neutral, conversational body language because you're hypersensitive at that point to the risk of rejection. And again, we're just being human because as a human, we need to detect the risk in our environment, and that's how we're evolved to do. And then it's like when we have, nice comments and negative comments, I'm pretty sure everybody here has the
Yeah.
similar experience. If you receive like a peer reviewer comments, you receive a student's evaluation, there could be like 95% of positive comments and 5% of negative comments. Your eyes always go into the negative one.
Yep.
That's just human nature. That's just how, our brains helping us to survive. And sometimes the good intention is not aligned with the good outcome. So, sometimes we get into that mode when we're in a social setting, we're hypercritical about ourselves and we see every sign as a sign of rejection. So a lot of that is as incorrect. So I guess correcting that way of um, you know, uh, that is being unhelpful in terms of in our social life. So that's one way. There has been social prescription interventions, for example, with mixed effects, though, that's when clinicians, for example, to identify those who are at risk, and then they refer them to existing social groups. And again, that presents opportunity for you to socialize it, but still, you have to uh, kind of have your inner thoughts processing aligned as well, because otherwise you go to a group and then you still have that filter on yourself, and that's going to be challenging, right? So again, just as how we discuss risk factors, it's very multi-level, and I think the interventions has to be at multi-level as well. So we shouldn't forget about our social environments, our built environment, um, even though that there's less evidence directly linking them. It's just purely because there are fewer studies, because it's harder to
Yeah.
study. But I think, on a really grand scale, like on a macro scale, we definitely see a dramatic difference across cultures and countries. For example, in Europe, in the Northern European countries, they're just leading this world in pretty much everything we measure health-wise. They tend to have much, much lower prevalence of loneliness, and one of the hypotheses, which I think is the most plausible one, is that because their society tend to be flatter, they have less social inequality, they have better social safety nets, so that everybody has the opportunity to feel a sense of belonging. And I think that's something that's really hard for a society, like the US and like in Australia. Unfortunately, we're becoming a lot more unequal as well. So, that is really a potential very, very important recipe for feeling social loneliness as loneliness and social disconnect.
Yeah. And I just have to ask you one more questions about interventions. What do you think about AI in both in interventions and in just people using it, just randomly for to relieve loneliness?
I, again, I'm trying to be really open-minded about this. I think AI definitely gives me some scares, like my existential crisis, because as academics, we thrive on our, intellectualism, right? And then all of a sudden you feel like you're being replaced. But I try to be open-minded about that because I do have friends around me who use AI as as their talking companions when they're having a hard time, when they need kind of psychological therapy, but they couldn't get it straight away. And I think if it's used like everything in this world, right? If we're using it in a healthy way, it's likely to do good. But if we're using it in um, a, um, a kind of unthoughtful way, or just, um, indulging it and not using it with a lot of consideration, then it could potentially create some problems. The same goes into social media, many of the things we do. I actually read a study that I find it really interesting that they use AI chatbot to provide social support for those with severe cognitive decline and dementia, because imagine grandma 80 something year old and starting to lose it in conversation and keep on repeating the same thing over and over again. It's very likely that at some point people around her is going to run out of patience to hear the same stories again. And in that situation, or grandma might have enough awareness to know that she could be a social burden for a lot of people, and then therefore she decides to withdraw because she knows that she tend to repeat the same thing. But in that case, if there is an AI companion that is designed for that purpose, who can actually train and improve the AI algorithm based on previous conversation with grandma. So when grandma brings up, oh, my neighbor Sally, blah blah blah, so the chatbot can just go along. Oh yeah, Sally, I remember you mentioned that. So it feels kind of a sense of companionship and validation in a way. So I think, as researchers, unfortunately, we now cannot fight the AI tide. It's just the tide is rising and it's so powerful. And then, it's more for us to think about how do we use it wisely and intentionally and considerably so that we can actually use it to help us create a better world.
Yeah. I totally agree. So we've talked about the importance of social connectedness for health and well-being. I'd like to shift our focus to social connectedness within academia itself. Before I do that, I would just like to again encourage our participants to post in the Q&A chat or in the Q&A section or in the chat any questions that you might have. We are very happy to get them.
Really curious. I wish we had this format that I can see everyone's face, right?
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
can, unfortunately, I cannot see you. I can see your name, but I can feel your presence. So thank you so much for being here. I always love opportunities to chat, especially with women, because we have a lot of challenges that only us understand. So I'm really curious. I mean, feel free to put it into the Q&A, like whether you find the academic environment conducive for social connection, or can you pinpoint, any aspects of the academic life that you find that it's facilitating um, or obstructing, I guess, a sense of community and social connectedness in a way. So I personally really feel it both ways. I feel that most people that I meet in academia are just the nicest, most idealistic people, and I think we're here for that same purpose and reason. We're not here for money, otherwise we will not be in academia, right? We're here for our sense of social responsibility. We want to create a better world. We want, like, we have that sense of idealism. And then, it's really good place to make friends. Most of my friends, I met them through academia, whether directly, from my work or in academic settings. And I think it's almost like a society that casts its web big and wide. So wherever I go in the world, I can always find friends because there are people who I've collaborated with. There are, people who work in the same field and, we support each other. So I feel that bigger sense of belonging as an academic employee. So I think that is really nice, the belonging aspect. But on the other hand, I really have to say that I decided to pursue an academic career probably around like 13 to 15 years ago, something like that. That was a completely different time. Like back then, the academic institutions are different from now. Like if we rewind back to 40 years ago, that's completely different as well. Because I wanted to go into a public institution, I wanted to go in somewhere there is this sense of we, not I. And then, in the last couple of years, I mean, especially in Australia, we just see it deteriorating with, more funding cut from the federal government. And then Australian universities are run more and more like private institutions. And therefore, we're all forced to get grants. We're all, many of us don't have job securities and then we're constantly feeling stressed, and we're constantly feeling that uncertainty. And then, that is when we're not feeling at our best, that's already not conducive to, going out and make friends. Because a lot of us, probably just like me, when I'm not feeling good, like I've just been through this crunch of writing my international investigator grant and I hated it. And during that time, I didn't want to go out socializing, not only because I didn't have time, but also because writing this kind of grants made me feel bad. And then, when you feel bad, you don't, we tend to shut ourselves down. And that's just what we're like evolved to do. It's not something wrong with us. It's totally normal. I just think we have too many moments like that in today's academia, unfortunately. And then we're all forced to compete as individuals as well. And I think with the fellowship schemes and things like that. And then that become kind of, sometimes I see this as like a very capitalistic kind of Wall Street sort of format that is not really, it's not compatible with the kind of the institution for the bigger good. So
Yeah.
um, I think that aspect could be alienating if because I hate to see the world that we live in, the way the world that we work in, that we consider each other as rivals and competitors. I think that's just not a safe and healthy environment that we want to be in. So, I unfortunately cannot offer solution, but I all hope all of us, have the awareness and try to, I guess, advocate for our rights and advocate for a better environment, starting from, I guess, making kind of micro positive environment around us. And, that's what I'm trying really hard to do. I try really hard with my team, I can't change the bigger environment, but I'm gonna try and create like the microcosm that, at least I can decide what the culture is going to be like. And I think women would do much better than men in that respect. And I think that we really need to believe in our power to change and shift the culture from, I guess, the what we have control of.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I totally agree. We do have one question. Someone asked, any advice for ECRs to connect with other academics interested in researching social connectedness? For example, conferences, writing groups, informal groups, etc.
Yeah, that's a really good thought.
Yeah,
Um,
we
yeah,
should do
I
so.
mean, yeah, maybe that's something. Maybe that's like a secret society that we can start as a result of this webinar. Why not? Yeah, feel free
Yeah.
to email Nesha and I after, and then we can think about it. And I think that would be a really nice spin-off from this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And as you suggested before, Melody, taking chances, reaching out to researchers. Now you know at least two loneliness researchers, Melody and myself. So feel free to contact us and look for other researchers as well, and just start by emailing them and ask to collaborate. Um, yeah, so I'm very interested in asking you. We often hear the term imposter syndrome in academia. Do you think there's a connection between imposter syndrome and loneliness?
Ooh, ooh, what do you think?
Yes, I think there is. Uh,
How do you experience that?
I experienced that in terms of sort of being sort of like a sense of the opposite of belongingness. So when
Mm,
you feel like you belong somewhere, you feel like, oh, I'm in the right place. I'm in my element. When you have imposter syndrome, you feel like, oh, I actually don't belong to this group of really great people. And that might isolate you or make you feel a bit lonely.
now you said that, I think I've experienced that too. I think we probably all have experienced that. The problem is we don't talk about it, right? Because just kind of again, I love how all our conversations so far, all the topics, they seems like different topics, but they all connect. Because just now when we're encouraging this participant to email out after, it kind of reminds me of my hesitation to email people, especially who are more senior than me, Um, and then that translates to people who are more junior than me and they try to reach out to me. And then I realized that, they don't understand what an imposter I feel I am. And then I'm just really flattered that someone takes interest in my research. And then for that person, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna email with this professor and blah blah blah. And it's funny because, again, it's fascinating how because we only have information about our mind, we know what's inside of our head. We can never get into people's head. I think if we can get into each other's head, that will definitely reduce a lot of misunderstanding, and that will kind of make connecting a lot more easier because, yeah, I feel the same. I withdraw myself sometimes when I feel like I'm not capable enough. I feel like I'm a fake. And then I meet this young woman recently at a conference who was like waiting patiently outside of the bathroom just so that she can talk to me. And then I I was over the moon. I was like, she was telling me how much my work has changed her work and how what a big impact that I had on her career, that I have never met her. I didn't know. It's purely through reading my work. And she was so scared of approaching me, but she decided to, but she really made my day. There's never like, no matter how high up we are one day, how senior we are, all these little human connection moments, no matter, like, even with a kindergartner, even with like a school student who emailed me, who was brave enough to email me to help her with one of her high school project. I got that a couple of times, and then I respond to her, and then she's like, oh, thank you so much, I have enough information for my assignment. Sometimes they will say, oh, I did a great assignment, thank you. Those moments, you really cherish that, and it doesn't matter, like, whether one person is a professor, a Nobel laureate, or whatever, and the other person was a school student. I think we all want that kind of validation. We all want more connection. So yeah, I just want to encourage you all to kind of reach out and remember that imposter syndrome is shared with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah,
will.
that's a great advice. Yeah, thanks for that. And so I would like to shift the focus on sort of like how to build a supportive research career. So before I ask you some questions about that, I would like to first ask you, looking back, who has had the greatest influence on your career? Or like a few people or a
Mm.
specific someone?
Ooh, that is a really that is a really hard one. I think especially before I moved to Australia, in my early days, my professors in the first 2 years of my education in public health, they taught in such a, compelling way that made me interested in pursuing. And they saw my potential when I couldn't myself, because I just thought I was like somebody who was quite misaligned in the background. I was a marine biologist turned public health researcher, and who's really just trying to keep up and, explore a new life in another country. I never thought much more of myself than that. But, my master's supervisors, my PhD supervisor, they gave me so many opportunities. They saw more in me than I had myself. And to be honest, they have been inspiration for me to do the same for others, because I couldn't return back to them the same way, because they were, 30 years my senior and or 40 years. But I could do the same to the students I supervise these days, or to students who knock on my door. So I feel like if we receive positivity, we should all pass it on, like to the next generation of researchers. And if we receive negativities, we all need to shield the next generation from experiencing the same that we experienced in the past.
And it
So,
sounds like you had some oh, sorry, go on.
I just like the last thing is like either we receive negative experience or positive experience, they are all opportunities of learning.
Yeah, that's words of wisdom. And so it sounds like you had a really good mentors in your career, and sounds like now you are a mentor yourself. So as someone who now mentors others, what do you think makes a great mentor?
I think the I think it's really important that you build a trusting relationship, and some I think the very old school way of looking at mentor and supervisor is that you cannot be friends with them. And I really want to challenge that, because I think that, having a good personal relationship is really important. Whether or not you take that to friendship, that's another story, but you need to create a safe environment that that person feels like they can really kind of be open to you. And a lot of time, it's actually not rushing to offer advice as well, because advice often arrives when you just are patient enough to sit with them and listen to them. And it comes to people sometimes. So I think, just really listen to them and don't make it too much about yourself. I because we can talk about, oh yeah, I did it that way, so you should do it that way. No, even 5 years apart, academia has changed so much. It's like we cannot use my experience 5 years ago to help someone now. So, trying to understand their circumstances, trying to help them see and help them get an alternative perspective, and and sit with them and try to understand what they really need. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so the other person who asked that question about how to connect with other academics, so I had sort of a similar question. Uh, what actually makes a strong and successful research collaboration?
That's a very big million-dollar question. I kind of have done things both ways. I'm really happy to share. And, when I first started my research career, as I just told you, I moved country again. So even though I already had some network in the States, I moved to Australia and I didn't know anyone. So, um, coming to a new university, trying to make network with people, we've all done that. And I guess at that point, I try to build collaboration based on the skills. And so the hard asset, let's say in a way, so that we can do this together. But now I build collaboration, partly based on skills, but probably more based on shared values. Because I think early on, I definitely had experience of, oh yeah, try to collaborate just because we can get the work moving quicker. But then, I worked with people who did not share the same value. It ended up being quite stressful for me. And no, these days, probably because I'm old enough, I think I guess and also because I'm not like super obsessed being successful and efficient and that sort of thing. I now approach collaboration more like, do we have similar value? Do I like you? Do I think I can work well with you? If you don't have the skills, we can explore that together. It might take a bit longer, but it will make the relationship more enjoyable. So I kind of moved from the more task focused to more people focused, and also I acknowledge that now I'm in a position that I can afford to take some time to let something develop. But early on, it was not as we had to do things in a rush a little bit when we're in the early stage of our career.
Yeah. And so we talked about what early mid-career researchers can do to build supportive careers and meaningful professional relationships. But I'd like to finish by thinking more broadly about the role of the institutions and the research community as a whole. So what role do you see the researchers and universities playing in creating more socially connected communities?
Oh my gosh. I wish decision makers were in this conversation. I, um, Around the world, unfortunately, what we're currently experiencing is, I guess, it's a decaying sense of trust in traditional educational institutions, and it's not just Australia, but in a lot of parts of the world, there is, I guess, a decline in university enrollment. It's partly economic and I guess partly social as well. Because back then, going to universities is such a good investment that you definitely get the worth double or multiple times back. But these days, it's with the tech gig economy that we're living through, it's a different story. So that's the economic side. But the social side, I think we're kind of losing some of the trustworthiness. And I don't want to blame it all on, I really don't want to blame it on us because I think we're doing the best we can. And it's a very situational, it's very contextual. Like what I mentioned, if you don't fund universities, the university will start to operate like private corporations. And then in Australia, just in the last year, there has been so many scandals at universities level that really kind of not making it easier to trust us as institutions and communities. I think it's really important that we kind of go back to what universities were about to start with. I really hope that we see changes at a political level, but as public health researchers, not just public health, just as researchers in general who are working in areas related to health and well-being, I think it's really important that we go back to what drove us into what we do to start with. The environment, unfortunately, because of the hyper competitiveness, creates such a like a dopamine driven culture that the dopamine hit that we occasionally get from, awards, grants, papers, it's actually may it dictates our behavior in a way that we get addicted to that. And then when we get addicted to that and just become like, I'm so driven by the success, we actually sometimes lose sight of why we were here to start with. And this is my heartfelt reflection recently, because like when I was telling you and others that, going through writing investigator grants, super stressful. And then in order for me to continue going through that process, of just trying to sell how good you are, I hate doing that. But but the system asks us to do that. It forces us to do that. So for me, I just kind of have to go back to that, I must have not fall for the dopamine trap because otherwise we're never going to feel that we're enough. Once we've published in this journal, then we want the next tier of journal. Once we've got this grants of this amount of money, next time we want to double that. It becomes the same as how people get obsessed with money and status. That's the comparison I told myself. So if I don't want to be that kind of person outside of the university world, then I don't want to be that kind of person within the university world. So I now like try to come back to what really interests me, like what kind of person I really want to be. The focus is on the person rather than, a successful researcher. So I guess that's what I do to myself at the individual level, and I'd like to share to individuals here as well. But, again, I'm just saying that we're in a tough environment. We're in a really tough environment that it's really hard for individuals to change and all change at the same time if the overarching environment doesn't change. So we all need to give ourselves some self-compassion. That is, it's really hard. And also, kind of go back to our heart and why we're in this place to start with, and not to get, kind of this dopamine driven competitive environment and comparing yourself with other people. Don't let that disorientate who we are and cloud our vision. It's much easier said than done, and I get clouded all the time.
Yeah. So I do have one final question, but before I ask the question, I would again like to encourage our audience to post. You have 5 more minutes to post any questions that you might have to Melody. Okay, so what I would like to ask you to just to close off, what are you most excited about over the next few years, both in your own research and in the field of social connectedness?
For me, I've done quite a bit of reevaluation of my career because I find that keep on trying to aim for the next big grants, it's not quite sustainable in the current environment. So I really kind of reinvent myself to to go global and let the some of my work to happen not necessarily within Australian context, but within a global context. So I've built up some great partnership in the Asia Pacific region and in European regions in the last couple of years. So I think for me that the really exciting thing is to see some of the project grow, within the space of social connection and beyond, and so that we can start to create more equitable literatures and evidence base because, at the moment, the high income countries, particularly English speaking high income countries, we're the main contributors to the literature. So I think it's really, it's for me, it will make a lot more sense to help grow and nurture the research environment in countries where we do not have as good evidence. So I really look forward to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing your experience and being so open. And thank everyone so much for joining us today. Yeah, and I hope today's webinar not only raised awareness of the importance of social connectedness, but also inspired everyone to build a more connected, supportive, and collaborative research community. After this webinar, you will receive a very short feedback survey. We would greatly appreciate it if you could just take a minute to complete it. Your feedback will help us to improve the content and delivery of future webinars. I'd also like to let you know we have other webinars previously that we have made in all kinds of topics. Feel free to check out the Wharton's YouTube channel or the Wharton's website. The next webinar, the next session will be on the 25th of August. It will be Social Media for Clinicians and Academics. Will be presented by Dr. Maria Lee and facilitated by my Wharton colleague, Dr. Gillian Tay. And thank you again, Melody, for sharing everything. And yeah, and it was incredible and very, very inspiring.
Thank you so much for your invitation, and many thanks to everyone who is here today. And feel free to reach out to us after.
Thank you.
Bye.